Questions of the board, how we want to handle standards. One, I thought maybe we'd have Bill read them to us. I mean, not maybe this whole report, but start out and then we all get a chance to hear, so let me read them. I like to hear it too, so we can, then we'll address the standard.
You want me to read the first standard? The proposed special use will not be detrimental to or endanger the health, safety, morals, comfort, or welfare of the public.
Well, the next phrase in there, it says the standard can be met if the permit or if everything is done right. So I think that's what we're here to decide.
I believe that statement that it can be met. I think that's what a lot of the issues that we've been discussing about the sound and setbacks and following IDNR recommendations has all been about. But that's the only way that it can be met as I see it right now, without some changements and ensuring that we feel confident that the noise levels are going to be within the standards. I wouldn't believe it had been met.
I'm not sure I followed the last part of that. You're saying that you think it has been met, or with some adjustments in there? That's what
I believe that it can be met as long as the adjustments that we have been discussing before are stipulated and made to happen.
Yes, I agree with that it can be met if we put some stipulations in here. And that might even exceed some of our own original regulation or own proposed standards we have. As we've got at least some question in there that there might be some, that we might need some adaptation in the low noise trailing edge blades, for example. I think Mr. Finnegan suggested we require those of all of the blades of all of the turbines, and that they put them already on a whole bunch of them. How would that be one of the things that you'd suggest we do?
Yes, that and our my thing about adding the 2 dB back in, so that those 7 are recalculated and moved or brought into line
or eliminated. Yeah, as bottom line.
Bottom line, yeah, but hopefully they wouldn't have to, some kind of minor adjustment could be made to make those viable. You know, I don't want to be in a position of taking them away from landowners either. So they have rights also.
I don't know that requiring them to put the noise reducing blades on every installation would be necessary. There's several of these that are well underneath the 40. So I'm not sure we'd have to go there at all because of the efficiency and other factors.
Well, we might be able to accomplish it by just what Mr. Kurtz said would be just put the dB level and the level that and they have to adjust their blades to that point, or whatever they got to do, eliminate, move, whatever it has to be. Yeah, our statute allows wind farms, so long as they meet the health standards, the morals, comfort, welfare standards, and that. And so our function has been, for a lot of this hearing, is see how they're going to meet that health standard. We raised questions about, hey, it's really noisy, and okay, well, how do you reduce the noise? And just what you're saying, Mr. Kurtz, reduces that noise to where it meets the standards of the code section 350 that we put in there. So I agree with you. And there are several adaptations, or whatever you call it, that may need to be in there. And it may be just 9, but I think it might be a little more than that.
Yeah, there were the adjustments that they have already worked out with Mr. Schertz and Mr. Hacker on moving and eliminating, so that the two airports in the area, people can land without flying into one of these things. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that have been discussed and agreed to.
I have questions about the 2 airports. What were the final decisions on those turbines there?
I think we got a report last night on that. I mean, but the told which ones they were going to move.
Yeah, I didn't think they moved. I mean, I didn't think they eliminated them all, and I thought both airports requested that for safety reasons. No?
What I recall is that they just moved them out of the way, and the airport operators were comfortable with, or they accepted. Maybe they didn't.
One of them was not comfortable. I would not say.
Yeah, well, he came up here and testified that he, I'm not really sure what his wording was, but he testified.
No,
He recognized that they had done something.
he was not satisfied. I took notes on what he said. He was not satisfied.
Mr. Schertz said that this may mitigate some risk, is what he said. But he negotiated with Invenergy the moving of 2 of those turbines.
And I think they lowered the tallest one at the end of the runway. They made it shorter, turbine there, and moved some. And Mr. Thacker's, I think they probably did what he asked, if I remember right.
I have that he eliminated one of them, but the other one was moved, and he wasn't satisfied with that.
When you say he, are you talking Mr. Schertz?
Mr. Thacker.
Mr. Thacker provided us a letter, didn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, I've got it.
January 17th letter.
Well, this is what my letter says. Of course, elimination of turbine 23 is the best interest of Thacker Airport.
What's the date of that?
This was handed out on Thursday, January 25th. The date on the letter was the 17th. And I'm going to see if I can find my notes from what he said.
Bill, can you tell us what the agreement last night said? Quoted?
I've got the letter dated the 18th.
The 18th?
18th, January 18th, to the McLean County Zoning Board of Appeals. It was applicant's exhibit number 18. And it says that Mr. Thacker and Mr. Gray have reached an agreeable solution to maintain a safe operating area near Thacker Airport, and Energy is offered to remove wind turbine 22 completely from the project and move wind turbine 23 to a total distance of 2,700 feet from the east side of the runway. Mr. Thacker has indicated this plan would be a workable solution for flight operations around the airport. AOPA supports this resolution, but would also ask that future consideration be given to removing turbine 23. That was AOPA, not Mr. Thacker.
So your letter is not written by Mr. Thacker?
No, this is from AOPA.
Right, and this letter is written by Mr. Thacker. And then he testified, I thought, last night.
No, that was Mr. Schertz.
Sure.
And I think fundamentally, you can't be too enthusiastic about that.
That about saying, I don't think that anybody who's operating an airport will say that eliminates all risks, because saying that on record in a public forum, having been sworn in, might have legal implications. He's never going to say he's never going to say, oh, that's going to take all the risks out of flying, especially in those circumstances. So I think that may have been the circumstance. I think he reached an agreement, but he didn't come in here and say, oh, it's taking away all the risk.
He did say, though, in that letter on the 17th, of course, elimination of turbine 23 is the best interest of Thacker Airport, in that letter too.
And I personally feel that that's very important. It's an airport.
I think we asked the question when that came up, has an agreement been made? And the answer was yes. So that was my understanding, that the agreement was made. And he was satisfied with that, but I might be mistaken, but that's my recollection.
We have it in writing that Mr. Thacker is okay with the compromise.
Mr. Chairman, should we start listing for what we're saying needs to be done before?
We're going to have to start doing it sometime if we want to do it, or if we want to have staff do it for us. In the past, Bill has been agreed to interpret what we say, and then we can acknowledge it at the end if that's right. Would you be in agreement with that?
I'll do what you request.
I wasn't the answer. I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure now if you want to do it. Okay, we got a volunteer right here. So Samantha's going to do that for us. And I think it just frees us up to doing other things. Somebody can, and she'll read back things to us, and we can agree with it. It might sound different if you read it back. Right?
If she's kept you in this long, I think we can go on.
So my two items, I guess, are one, that they will comply with all of the IDNR recommendations, which includes deletion of, which will mean that turbine 91 has to disappear. And my second issue is that the 2 decibels needs to be added back onto the report, and that the seven receptors that have a dB value of over 41 or more need to be dealt with so that they are in compliance with the IDNR standard.
You mean 40 or more, correct?
Actually 41.
He says 41.
Yeah, the IP the IPCB, in that California report, in there it says 41 is the nighttime maximum range.
Okay, so what you're saying is, once they add those two back in, any that are over 41. Okay,
41 or over
okay,
need to be revised to be less than 41.
And we're not gonna tell them how to do that. We're gonna tell them it just has to be that way.
Yes.
On the Illinois DNR said they want to have 3-year studies, and I think that's a reasonable request to, I'd like to make sure that that gets done. This is not a big burden, and it would solve it'll save a lot of time in the future. Well, we adapted it all, but I want to underline that.
Did you have something else, Chris?
No.
I think the other thing we need to, on down, it mentions the decommissioning guidelines, and just make sure that those prices are updated to indicate going to 5 foot, which I think is the $52,000 figure.
We have a number right here as well.
I had it too, but now I don't.
52,809 per turbine.
And I believe they adapted, that number is 52,809 per turbine. Our statute is 35,000, so it's significantly above. And we're stating this, that it can be adapted upward, adjusted upward as needed, should that be found in the future. And I think that the applicant has already stipulated that that's in their proposal. But we will make sure that it gets in there by having Samantha write it down.
And I would also like to align, I don't know if this is the place to do it or later, but align the agricultural agreement stipulations and ours, and defer to the agricultural agreement. I think theirs was 11 years, and ours stated 12 years, that they would start putting money into an escrow or getting a surety bond, whatever that was.
Are you talking about the requirements for the AMA?
Yes,
Okay.
right.
What I can tell you is AMA is state law, and the same way we would defer on something else. State law will, I don't want to say trump, but it will control what we do. So if AMA says 11 years will be the trigger point. You know, they will then by default meet ours as well.
Okay.
Because it's a year earlier.
Yeah, there's just in many different places, it's differing, so I just want to make sure that we have that clear.
Okay, so do you want language that that they adhere specifically to the AMA, or do you want language that they start with the decommissioning procedures in accordance with AMA? How do you want that language?
Yes, that's fine, strictly with AMA.
Okay.
I did have one thought or issue with the decommissioning dollars. I agree. When you look at the total proposal, it's instead of the $5,200,000 or whatever it is, it's 11 million and change. When you add in the dollars that are captured from selling off the metals and the the turbine parts. So I think that when you factor that in, that these costs are appropriate. However, if they only went to decommission 1 or 2, there are setup costs that are divided out amongst those, including erecting these huge cranes and getting this equipment there. That $52,000 won't come close to covering it. So I don't know how we would handle that, but any partial decommissioning might be an issue.
The decommissioning money only comes into consideration due to the surety bond. If they're actually, and that only comes in if they abandon them without doing it. So they're paying whatever it costs to decommission those. And we get the bond just in case they abandon it, so that we can go in and pay. And according to AMA, we're allowed to have that estimated again in 10 years before it kicks in at the 11th. And they have to provide a surety bond on that new estimate at 10 years.
Okay, what if they only abandon a portion of them?
We have the whole bond.
In the health safety, we're in the health safety issue. The applicant said they will, on number 11 of their stipulation, the applicant will coordinate and provide aid to local fire districts and to promote safety and emergency response procedures. Yes, that's good. I'm saying I would like to have provide aid set to some dollar amount. In the first hearing, they said, well, it was a few $100 million for the overall organization. There's only $29,000 that they gave to the local emergency and fire procedures, fire districts and that. That's not much money, especially, and it may not be enough to provide the local fire districts and the local emergency services. May they never be used, but I'd like to have some more assurances on that front. And I'm not sure exactly how to get that and how to put it into the wording, but I'd like to have more support for local fire and emergency services come in there.
Is that within our power to put an order on it?
I would tell you you'd have to be able to point to an ordinance or a statute or something of that nature. And I'm looking at the standards in the special use, looking at the specific ordinance that we have with regard to wind farms. I guess I'm not seeing anything that will allow for that. I understand the concern, but unless someone can point to something specific in my review, I don't see anything that would give the board that authority.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. They have coordination with local, we have coordination with local fire department and submit to the local fire department a copy of the site plan and a few other things, but, and they gotta apply, they have to comply with that. I guess it's a point that we would like them to cooperate. We can't really, as a stipulation, so too bad.
There is coordination that happens between the emergency services and the townships. There's usually they hold a meeting beforehand, and there's a mass email that gets sent out usually on a daily basis on a project like this. And
I'm not sure what additional equipment needs to be purchased, if anything, and who's buying that equipment. If we don't have it, we haven't heard testimony to that effect. I just don't want to burden the local fire and police department, especially since many of them are volunteers, to come up with a bunch of new equipment when there's a multi-$100-million project going out that they're going to have to deal with. I hope they don't have to deal with anything, but if a tornado or something goes through there, I want everybody to be well prepared for that.
Sure, and I cannot answer what additional equipment they would need as well.
I guess by mentioning it, I would hope that the applicants are hearing our concerns for that.
We also heard from the crowd that in one of these other wind farms that went up, there was some concerns as to emergency, if there was an emergency, how could they have gotten to some of these homes? There was not a communication necessarily that the road was going to be blocked. You know, maybe Jerry, you can help out with that. If there's an avenue of communication, that there could be some assurance that these people aren't going to be left in the cold should this take place. There's some way of communicating to these people, or at least some assurance that they'll have another route.
Yeah, I agree with that, with some of the testimony that was given about that. I don't know the circumstances of where that gentleman lived and where the access road was and why he was cut off from his residence, but we do put in the road use agreement that they have access at all times, and we do close the road down on certain periods of time for crane crossings and other things for equipment to get delivered, but it should not impede the access to the residents. And so, yeah, I think there needs to be some better communication there on a daily basis. And like I said, I don't know the circumstances. I never did hear too much on previous wind farms that it had been an issue as far as people not being able to get to their homes, but I don't, that's all I can. We know with that gentleman's testimony, that's the first I've heard anything like that.
Couldn't 911 operator be clued into the loop on these conversations on a daily and know that there's going to be a road blockage and something, because there is such a thing as life flight if you had to fly the helicopter in and pick them up, somebody having a heart attack or something like that, and if the 911 operator knew that the road was blocked, they could go right straight to that.
Well, you know, you hear road blockages in Bloomington all the time for sewer repair and all this, and that's on WJBZ first thing in the morning. You know, so I'm not saying it'd be that simple, but if you had a way of communicating through that, through the radio or somewhere, it'd be helpful. But also, unless it was completely blocked, I think most times rescue would go through a field to get to a house. I mean, I've seen it. I mean, they don't spend any time messing around. They do what they got to do.
And with that email going out every time, they probably include EMTs and other immediate emergency services saying we're working in this and such section, and it would be very useful if the people involved knew that these 5 people were there and had and knew of any special circumstances there. I'd rather have people be over-prepared and never have to use that. And this may be just a word to the wise that we would really like the applicants to have that kind of coordination going on with the local health and safety people. That I think there are a lot of messages coming through here that we were very concerned about the health and safety.
I'll ask the question: are we satisfied that we can move on from standard 1, or you want to talk about it some more?
Is everyone satisfied about the airport? That the airports are in good shape? I mean, both of them responded that they had an agreement and that they were happy with one part, but they still had each had one turbine that they would like to see go away. So
I feel the airports have been addressed. And I'm okay with moving on.
I got a nod from Chris, and she was the one that addressed that. And did your question get answered?
No, I'm still not satisfied. I think airports are very important, and both gentlemen initially were dissatisfied. The the wording in the letter is, you know, it sounds like, well, I have to accept this, but I'm not really satisfied. So, I mean, I'm only one person, but that's how I feel.
Everybody's voice is important in this. So we want you to say what you want to say.
Yeah, if they moved off of center and agreed to a compromise, because I didn't hear any mention of expansion, which would, this would eliminate the potential for expansion, I'm guessing, for them, if they compromised on what we see before us.
What I'm seeing is, I think maybe we ought to move to standard 2. Bill, would you read that to us?
Could I read this? Maybe, I don't think you maybe, are you reading the letter from Bill Thacker from January 17? And you think that he's still not satisfied? Okay.
Yeah, I think when you say when he says it's not in the best interest of Thacker Airport, I don't think that sounds like he's satisfied. You know, there's a very long letter that he wrote to us prior to that. You know, I just, again, I think if we're talking about safety issues, we don't want our airplanes crashing because of a wind farm being in the way.
I feel that Mr. Thacker would have come back and talked to us, at least given a closing or verbalized that he wasn't happy, if in fact he wasn't. And after that agreement was reached, we didn't hear from him again after they submitted that.
Well, that's all I have to say.
The proposed special use will not be injurious to the use and enjoyment of other property in the immediate vicinity for purposes already permitted or substantially diminished property values in the immediate area.
This is my 4th wind farm hearing, and this is the devaluation of the property has been a big issue on all 4 of them, and a big worry, and it's understandable. But to this point in time, the only information other than people's gut feelings that I found, the only data and the only studies show that it really doesn't affect residential prices, at least in the long term. And if anything, if you've got a wind turbine on your property and you're selling your farm, it actually increases the value of the land. Is what the testimony I heard. So.
Yeah, what was interesting, again, this being the 4th farm, 4th wind turbine project, I think I've heard too, is the number of complaints in the various counties where not only ours, but in other places where they've had wind farms, and there haven't been there haven't been hardly any complaints at all, and the few that were there were a couple in one county, were dismissed, and they didn't have the changes in property assessment values or anything like that. So we heard some evidence on that, and I don't think we've been looking for this because we were all concerned about. We heard a lot of people saying worried about my property value, but we haven't found that that's been true over a long period of time. Short term, absolutely can happen. Mostly from fear, I suppose.
And I think, it's easy to dismiss that unless you're trying to sell your house in that short term. And then it's very hard to dismiss. And what we're allowing here, what's been asked, is that we give them 3 years on this. And my only question, and it's truly a question, is 3 years, that's 3 years of uncertainty, potentially, for them to complete the project. Is that something that we should allow, or should we stick to the 2 years?
I think it's 3 years from the start of the project. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Right, so they have, it could be more than 3 years.
Would you say the other wind farms have typically been built within a year?
Can't really say. One of them was never built. And one of them got delayed about a couple of years because of issues. But they conceivably could. The reason these both are kind of in a hurry because they think they might be able to get started right away. But you really can't tell because there's still variables.
I know it's not the same, but a lot of times we will give people that come in for a special use or variance or whatever special use for a house in a county a little extra time because it's there's a lot of variables in it, you know, and this is more important. I know that, but it's not something that they're asking for that we don't do.
How long after it is approved by the county board, are they allowed to continue to change the location of the turbines after that point?
They're allowed to move them certain distances so long as they still meet the setback requirements. If they move them, they'd have to meet the sound requirements as well.
My only thought is if someone is trying to sell their house, that they would at least be able to show what the plan is. That's why I'm asking that. But if they're able to adjust the plan dramatically, that wouldn't be a big help.
They're not really allowed to adjust it dramatically.
And I believe, I heard Mr. Moreau say when he was talking to Mr. Schwass, that once construction started, that the uncertainty, yeah, they're gonna build it, went away, and that's when things started recovering. It was that point from when they introduced it till we have the hearings and till they started where the uncertainty really lied.
Right, and that's my point, is we're talking about giving them more time. We're talking about giving them 3 years of uncertainty for these people, because they have 3 years to apply for it. I'm not saying that's wrong, I'm just saying that we need to realize what we're impacting if we make that decision.
I'm comfortable with that. I think it's something we've done before.
Yeah, I'm not sure this is an absolute standard that will not be injurious to the use and enjoyment of other people's property. It's not saying it's not going to have any impact whatsoever, but it's not such a dramatic impact that that it isn't already, that it isn't acceptable within this range. It's not 100% standard. So I'm okay with number 2.
Standard 1 and standard 2 are the main ones that we need to get past. So if we need to talk about these a little more, we need to do it. But they're the ones that if the board says that it meets this standard, we're kind of moving through with the rest of it.
The injurious to the use and enjoyment of property in the immediate vicinity for purposes already permitted, cement, or that part of it, I think that our changes to the decibel levels are going to help that. You know, there are lots of people talked about being out in their yards and in their property, and our standards say that you measure at the house or at the foundation, where the Illinois Pollution Board standards say at the property line. So that kind of leaves out the yards. So hopefully by being more conservative, we'll take care of that yard noise to some extent.
You can do a little math on the normal lot, assuming it's a 5-acre lot, and assuming the house is in the absolute center of that lot. If you add 220 feet, give or take a couple feet, that's the difference between to the house itself and to the property line difference. So the state standard versus our standard is not a gigantically different length of space. It's if it were in the middle of an 80-acre lot, that's 80 acre. People don't have 80-acre house lots. Normal house lot is maximum like 5 acres. So a couple hundred feet solves that.
Unfortunately, there were a couple of them that testified that it had 20 and 30 acre timbers or area that had some timbers and those type of things on it too. So.
And the timbers and the other things also mitigate the sound. So assuming we have a flat, straight area and a flat line, a couple hundred feet, and we've already specified that they adjust the turbines accordingly in terms of noise, which should take care of that.
And that's what I was advocating, that our changes, that our stipulations for standard 1 also are going to take care of those issues on 2.
Well, advocating is like required, I think, that this isn't just a suggestion that you put out there.
On the bottom there, it says McLean County has not yet received the pre-siting study. Have you gotten that? Okay.
That was the IDNR thing that we dealt with.
Okay. Did that include the 10-mile Eagle survey?
That wasn't included as a stipulation of IDNR.
Okay. Does anyone know any more about the rule that exists on that? What that actually should be? Wind companies are required to do 10-mile.
I don't know, but Dr. Angelo Caparella has been doing raptor surveys, and he didn't bring it up as a big point. And I think if anybody was going to bring it up, this is like his flagship item. And I didn't hear him mention it even when I brought him back up and said, hey, what are you doing with the raptor surveys? So I believe that it's important to have the distance requirements and the other things that from Henline Creek and from the other perennial flow creeks or whatever they call that, which I think we stipulated in the first one. That's in the IDNR thing. So I think that's going to help. I don't know.
I was looking at neutral exhibit number 8 on second to last page. It says in 2016 Eagle Rule PEIS language requires a wind company to conduct a 10-mile eagle nest survey around the project site.
Oh, that is part of our ordinance, so it's in there. So, we're covered on that one. And the number is 250.04, 350 point something 04.
Has it been done? I realize it's part of the stipulation, but has it been done?
They did one in 2016, but they eliminated it in 2017. So I guess we need one for 2017, sounds like. Well, 18 now.
We haven't received that. We haven't received the pre-setting state. The only thing we received is, it's in the application of some of the data about the eagle's nest.
I guess what I see from the board is we're ready to move on to 3.
I was just gonna say the Eagles Nest study is in our binder. Dated, I don't know if that's the date we received it, but it says November 15, 2007. The report is done in 2/16. There's all kinds of stuff in there.
That's number 5 in the first set of numbers.
What section is that again?
5 in the first one. Green button.
Brian's got figure 1 here that shows a 10-mile Eagle Nest survey area. Age,
It's a nice big map.
page 4.
My recollection, I think it was one study made and then they didn't do it. They dropped the distance back or something. And the second one didn't include the same information as the first one. That's my recollection.
That's what was testified to. I don't know that it has been verified. Can we state that it be verified that we have that and move on?
I think we can do that. Is everybody in agreement? So we're ready to go to, are we checking these off as we go? The basis of what we're saying, we're not going to go back through the plans again. We're saying that it met standard 1, and we're saying now it met standard 2. So let's move on to standard 3. Bill could read that to us.
The proposed special use will not impede the orderly development of the surrounding property for uses permitted in the district.
Anyone want to chime in on that one?
I think this one's not, it's an agricultural district, and they can still do that.
I agree.
Move on to standard 4. Jeff, I'm right.
Yeah, ordinarily we see leasing scores on these. Is because of the parcels, or the actual size of the turbines, they did not have leasing scores on these.
We haven't usually done Lisa scores for the wind farms.
Thank you.
And And back to Chris's point, this is where the airstrip issues come in. And they've adjusted the turbines to minimize the adverse effects of that. So I'm good with 3.
So we have a consensus on 3. Let's go to number 4.
Adequate utilities, access roads, drainage, or other necessary facilities have been or will be provided.
We heard the one person testify that his basement filled up after some green tile got fixed. Then they sold the wind farm to somebody else, got it fixed. And I don't know how we can make sure that issue gets solved if it were to come up. But I'd want to make sure that nobody's basement gets flooded because some broken drain tile.
Well, and the other side of that was when it was sold, there was no recourse.
Yeah.
It needs to be transferable if there's a situation that hasn't been resolved.
I agree with what you're saying there, because they need some protection in that, and there's a lot of underground wires go in, and you don't see that you broke a tile until it maybe shows up a year or 2 later. So I'm not sure how we address it, but we ought to put something in there for that.
Yeah, especially when you're doing some of the boring type wire installations under roads and things where you don't trench. You know, if you trench, you ought to see it, especially if it was clay tile. I mean, most of it's the black corrugated now, but you run into some of the old ones. But when they're doing that bore and they just shove it under there, they can disrupt stuff like that and never even know it.
Yeah, and we want to keep a lot of this from disturbing the surface, but the problem is you do that in a dry year, and 1, 2, 3 years later, you come up with a bunch of water problems. And whether you're a farmer or whether you're a landholder or something else, we want to make sure there's a recourse against somebody there, so that whoever has a problem can get that fixed.
I'm not sure how we address it. I mean, we could ask our council to see if there was something there that she can think of that we can put in that.
I was pretty confident that there was already protection for the landowner for these kind of issues in past wind farms.
I think it's important for the applicant to provide a phone number and contact person to deal with problems when they come up, and be encouraged to contact them. And if those people don't help, then they should call our office. But the applicant should provide help for those folks.
What if it goes a year or 2 after it's built? I mean, like this, if it got sold or something unforeseen happened, where do they get how do they get help?
Well, when they sell it to somebody else, they have to sell that idea that they need to provide the same help to the customers.
I think we need to put that in some kind of writing. I mean, some kind.
Is that covered by the AMA report, or the AMA standards?
I think it's covered in our ordinance where, when property gets transferred, the responsibilities go with it as well as the assigns or the new owners. I'll read that part to you.
So therefore, there'd be no statute of limitations on one of these projects if that company were to sell.
It goes something like this with regard to the decommissioning plan shall be binding upon the owner or wind operator or any of his successors, assigns, or heirs. But we could have that. We should have that in there for the persons who are experiencing problems, so that gets transferred with it.
Well, we'd have to get that from day one, not 12 years later, as a decommissioning. It'd have to be as the project is ongoing somehow.
Yeah.
I know she wants to say something, so we're gonna let her.
The statute of limitations on property damage is 10 years from the discovery.
From discovery, it gives them a pretty good, gives us a good time frame.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of case law on known, should have known, things like that, but the general rule of thumb is a 10-year statute of limitations.
Then burden of proof.
I'm sorry.
It's burden of proof.
I mean, if you're talking about in a court of law, yeah, there would be a burden of proof. If you're talking about bringing it to the attention of the wind farm operator, I mean, I think that could be done at any time. But if you're talking about for legal purposes or for purposes of litigation, yeah, I mean, there would be, the onus would be on the individual to show, and then there's different burdens and things that go with it, but to show that the property damage should be repaired or what have you.
And Haman definitely does set out requirements of the company for landowners, and it also states that they have to give notice if there is a change of ownership.
It kind of sounds like it's already covered, but I guess I would suggest this. If our council would look into that, and she knows what we're talking about here, our concerns, and it's not taken care of, we'd like to have that done, and I guess it's kind of important.
Let me make sure I understand what you're indicating. Are you wanting then as a stipulation as part of standard 4 that the applicant provide a specific individual or contact information in the event that there is an issue? Is that what you're asking for?
With somebody that's going to take care of the problem, somebody's going to mitigate their problem, yeah.
Okay. So
If you don't have any contact with, they're not going to take care of it.
So you're looking for, I suppose, a direct line of access, someone in particular? Okay.
If they don't take care of the issue, what's the redress? Can he pull the pump? Can he pull the permit and say, shut down this or these utilities, these wind turbines?
Well, we would want them to, if they can't get satisfaction from complaining to the applicant or the owner, to contact us, and then we would treat it as a zoning enforcement issue.
That makes sense. And historically, the zoning enforcement issue can be very gentle up to a point and then quite insistent.
Well, and I don't think that's necessarily the only issue that's here. And like Mr. Banger had said, there are property rights at issue. There are landowners' rights, whether it's where the property where the turbine sits or it's an adjoining landowner's property. They have the right to sue. They have the right to seek compensation, and that's why he was asking about the statute of limitations. So, although I understand the concern about addressing the issue with the applicant, they have the individual landowners have means beyond simply contacting them if it doesn't meet a satisfactory end. They do have legal rights and legal options under the law that they can pursue as well.
On another vein, at the bottom of that, it also talks about erosion around roadways, waterways. Who actually is going to enforce that for erosion? Is that something that the county will check into?
If erosion occurs on the right-of-way or township right-of-way, the county highway or the respective township would cover it.
How about if an access road goes through a waterway? Who takes care of that? Landowner?
The landowner has certain rights and responsibilities, but we pretty much have to have it reported to us as far as the erosion, because otherwise we're not going to really see it. But if it comes to our attention, then we will bring it to their attention, and that's why we would like to have a standard or a stipulation in there that they're required to do that erosion control and to deal with the issues with the waterway before they deal with accessing or installing the actual road.
Don't the state SWIP laws take care of that? Where you have to put the silt fence up, and I mean, it's a construction project, and we always had to comply with that. Put together and I used to know what SWIP stood for, but we had put together a plan, and we had to monitor the silt fence and all that kind of stuff. So anywhere you're close to those waterways.
Phil, what you're asking here is that we put in a stipulation to install vegetated strips along the upstream side of access roads that are prone to washing out. So you're asking, we need to put that stipulation in there?
I think we're just gonna have some kind of adequate verbiage that says that if erosion happens, they're gonna do something to mitigate it. And it's maybe already in there. But if somebody's idea of mitigating other guys, it's something else.
Well, and that's why I think here they're saying put it on every one of them. Vegetated strips along the upstream side of access roads. So make sure there's a vegetated strip on the upstream side of access roads.
Sounds reasonable.
I think so too. And I think it's written well there. And then also the next one says to minimize erosion along access roads, waterways should be improved before access roads are installed.
That was some of my question is who's gonna look this over, because it's on private property. A lot of these access roads are on private property.
So this is gonna be a complaint-driven system.
It sounds like there's enough wordage in there that we can get it taken care of. I'm satisfied, everybody else is.
We heard some comments on different places that they couldn't, the wind farms couldn't produce a log of certain things, like how many times they went out to a different place for the Department of Natural Resources studies, and for the bird studies and some other things. And I was thinking about it, what about a master log for complaints? I don't think it'd be too, if they're getting the complaints, they could compile them. And that could be a publicly accessible record as well. Is this, I see our attorney reaching for her button, so.
Sorry, I was just asking for clarification with the log to be kept by the applicant.
Yeah, who should keep the log by the applicant? Would it be appropriate for the applicant to keep such a log, master log of complaints, and make it available, say, annually to the zoning board?
Is that something that, and maybe I missed at the beginning of your statement, are you identifying this as part of the ordinance or one of the use standards, or?
And no, as a stipulation that we would add to this.
Okay.
Because if we have a complaint-driven system, building on Brian's item, and there happen to be complaints, how are we going to know? And if it is a pattern where there's a whole bunch of complaints, how is the zoning board ever going to find out about this?
Okay, I want to make sure I understand, because I'm keep taking it down here. So you want a log of complaints kept by the applicant, made available on an annual basis, or made public at any time? How?
Well, I'm not sure what the appropriate way to report it would be. If there are a whole bunch of complaints coming in, how is anybody going to know about it?
So I want to know what the point of this is, because I think Phil has already stated that if they don't get it taken care of there, they come to the county at that point in a complaint, and then we know to take care of it then. But if they're complaining to the applicant and they're taking care of it, do you want record of all those complaints?
What's appropriate? What I want is that participants in the community are, the participants being the landholders and the waterways and all of the other, what would you call it, the environmental areas are being taken care of and not being run roughshod over. So that if someone goes out there and if there are a whole bunch of, if there's a pattern of complaints, that it would become, it would come to the attention of the zoning board.
I can't tell you what's appropriate or inappropriate. I can tell you what you have the legal authority to do. That's kind of a fact question for you guys to determine. So if you tell me that you believe that that's part of one of the use standards or part of the ordinance, and as such it should be a stipulation, I'm more than happy to record that, but I can't tell you what's appropriate and what's not. That's for you guys.
Something that we probably have this covered just through the complaint system that is already in place.
The other thing is the people with the access roads are the ones that have turbines and have contract. We don't know what or what it may be covered in their contract with Invenergy.
Okay. Are we satisfied with this before? Let's move on to 5.
Adequate measures have been or will be taken to provide ingress and egress so designed as to minimize traffic congestion in the public streets.
Based upon the plan that they've submitted and the fact that it sounds like they have a system set up for communication on a regular basis, I think this is right.
I agree.
I think we have a consensus on 5. Let's go to 6.
The establishment, maintenance, and operation of the special use will be in conformance with the intent of the district in which the special use is proposed to be located.
Well, I think if you read Father, it says that they are compatible, and I do believe that no matter what you think, wind farms or it's another form of farming on your property, using of your property. So I think it does fall within that intent. What anybody else thinks?
I think 6 is met.
We got 7 left.
The proposed special use in all other respects conforms to the applicable regulations of the agriculture district.
I'm getting nodding ahead, so at this point, I guess we're probably ready for a motion unless you have something else you want to talk to. I don't want to rush.
Can we make sure that all the stipulations on the last page here, that we've covered all of them, just to make sure?
I think we're going to have council read everything to us, along with the additions.
Okay, I'm going to read what the stipulations I've identified based on what you stated. If I'm incorrect, let me know. Under standard 1, Mr. Kurtz had requested that the 2DB be added back in to make sure that all turbines are below the IPCD nighttime standards. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. To adopt all IDNR recommendations, which would result in the removal of turbine 91, and in particular require the 3-year study. Adopt the decommissioning rate as proposed by the applicant at the rate of $52,809 per turbine. Require compliance with all requirements in AMA. And this was batted around, I don't know if this was agreed upon or not. Require LNTE or low noise trailing edge blades on all.
And we took that out because
Okay.
we said they just had to meet the noise requirements.
Okay. Standard 2 and 3, there were no stipulations added. Standard 4 identifies a specific contact information for problems and issues made available from applicant to the public. And then there was language, vegetative strips along the upstream side of access roads to avoid erosion. And there were no stipulations added to standards 5, 6, or 7.
Okay, and then in addition to those, I think we have the ones that are listed on the staff report. And the ones that weren't covered in what you read are number 1, which is the written road agreement with the county, and then number 2, written road use agreement with the townships, and that they have to follow the plans and documents submitted. That's number 3. And then number 4, we covered because there were changes in that. And number 5, also covered there. But that 5 feet changed because it's a larger tower. Didn't it?
Still 5
Oh,
feet
but they
below.
did it, but they did the estimate on 4.
48,
That's right,
48.
okay, that's right, sorry about that.
Number 4 and 5 were decommissioning,
Correct,
and we just up those standards
right,
and up the value.
right. Number 6, the pre-sighting study, we've got that, except we need to double check on the Eagle, the 10-mile Eagle. 7 needs to stand, 8 needs to stand, 9 also, 10 also, and 11 also.
I've just marked down generally to adopt all stipulations not previously identified in the staff report.
I'd move to recommend approval of SU 17-11 with all the amendments and stipulations.
Second.
We have a motion by Kurtz, second by Zimmerman, with stipulations I think all talked about. And I think we're ready for roll call vote.